Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm just going to announce my involvement in a big year-long event in 2023. So I'm not a co-host, although I have been added to the Voxer group, so I don't know if that makes me a co-host or not, but I haven't been announced as a co-host. But it's an awesome event, and it taps into my personal history, because as a graduate of a history degree, I had to read a lot of history books, and haven't done that for like 20 years, but I do have a very strong interest in history. My course in particular was social history, and I have a very strong interest in social history, so there's going to be a bit of a thread running through my TBR that a lot of it's about history from the ground up rather than top down. So a lot of education institutions, like schools especially, teach you history from top down, so they talk about kings and queens a lot, and big battles and all that sort of stuff, whereas I'm interested in the lower end of the spectrum in general. So that's where a lot of my reading is going to come from, but that might make it a little bit more interesting, because it could be that some of the others are going to look at battles or monarchs or rulers of some kind, I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see what the... there's a whole variety of things you can cover. Obviously, history is huge. By definition, there's a lot of it. So it's going to be interesting to see what everybody picks to read. But this is an event that's been started by Vin from Revenant Reads. So I'll link his channel below. I don't think he's done an announcement yet, so I can't link his announcement video. But as soon as he does it, I'll add it to the description, and I'll add a few more of the videos I've seen before now that have talked about it, that made me think, oh, I need to do this. So it's a year-long event. It's split into quarters, so it's basically 3-month periods that are different periods of history. So it goes right back to the year dot, and it comes right up to the present day. So it's quite a nice way to split it up. And within those periods, there's loads of different things you can cover, loads of different countries you can cover, loads of different events you can cover, loads of different perspectives you can cover if you like to. And I'll show you what I'm going to do. But I'll go over the periods first, because you may not have seen this Historathon event being advertised. And if you haven't, I urge you to look at the others after me, because they're really good videos. But I'll just explain where we go. So from January to March, then you have to read at least one book, and it only has to be one book, but you could read tons if you want, but at least one book that covers the period from prehistory, so before recorded history, to 500 AD. So that's clearly potentially millions of years, but most people will probably go for something that covers the BC period, I would have thought. And then in April, we switch, and from April to June, another 3-month period, there's a whole 1,000 years covered. So it's basically the medieval period, and nipping into the early part of the early modern period. So 500 AD to 1500. 500 AD to 1500. So probably my favourite part of history, to be fair. So I would like to read more from what I've got down there for it, but we'll see, because I'm doing tons of other events. I'm doing so many book events next year. I'm doing my own Ray Bradbury thing, but I am taking that slowly, to be fair, and I'm doing my folklore and fairy tales thing, which is a bit heavier than what I usually do when I just tackle an author or whatever. This is going to be a bit like that, I guess. So anyway, that's April to June. April to June is 500 AD to 1500. So massive period of time there. And then from July to August, the prompt is to read any book, or several books if you want, but at least one book that covers the period from 1500 to 1820. So nipping into the modern period here. You've got industrialization, and you've got everybody traveling around the world, and it's definitely much more of an industrialized world at this point. But then you get into September to December, and you've got modern history. So you've got 1820 to the present day. So I've got quite a few books that I was going to read for that as well. So these aren't books I'm definitely going to read, but these are ideas I've got. And some of them are rereads, some of them aren't. I'll explain which ones are rereads and which ones aren't. But it gives me a chance to read some things I haven't read that I own. But it also gives me... I can't resist some of these things that I'm going to read again. So I'll talk about those. Okay, so prehistory to 500 AD. So this is the first prompt from January to March. So I'm going to read a book about evolution, because clearly if we're going to go right back, then we're going to go right back to how we evolved into the species we are now. So this is a book about evolution. Richard Dawkins, obviously infamous Richard Dawkins, who some people, I mean, you know, he's a bit polarized, I guess, or polarizing, but this is his kind of popular science book on evolution, The Greatest Show on Earth. So I'm going to read that. And I'm also going to read something that dips into the early AD period. So it goes into the sort of 200-300 AD. So it's just at the cusp of this prompt. And that's Battling the Gods, Atheism in the Ancient World. So I was really, really keen to get this. I got this ages ago, actually. I got it from the one of the museums in London. What museum was it? I can't remember what museum it was. It was the British Museum. And I thought it was just looked awesome, and I haven't read it. And this is ages ago, so it's about time I read it, and it's absolutely up my street. I've read a lot of books about atheism and non-belief and heresy, and questioning authority, questioning the norm, all those kind of things within the idea of faith and spirituality, and the way that religion massively governed early history. So I do find this really fascinating. So Atheism in the Ancient World, I can't wait to read that. Battling the Gods, if that looks interesting to you, it's a favourite book, and it's not very big, and it's probably available anywhere, because this is quite a standard release. I think it's not that obscure, but you may not have heard of it. Atheism in the Ancient World, Battling the Gods. That's the other thing I'm going to be covering for the first prompt. And then we get into more recorded history, and we've got 500 AD to 1500, from April to June. This is where I'm going to... Oh, talking about heresy again. There is a little bit of a thread here. Yeah, this covers kind of the period from about 900 AD to going up towards the 1400s. This is really, really interesting to me. I really am fascinated by this. So if you've got any suggestions on these kind of things, that's cool. But I've read quite a few of those things. I have read this, but again, it was over 20 years ago. So I do really want to read it again. The War on Heresy is by R.L. Moore, and I'm definitely going to be reading that one for that period. I'm also going to be... Yeah, this is a good excuse for me to read this. I bought this in Nottingham, and it's supposed to be uncovering the truth about Robin Hood. So Robin Hood is obviously a bit of a mythic figure. There is some evidence that it could be traced back to two different members of the landowning gentry who gave it all up and became just sort of lived in the forest. And there's supposed to be either Robert of Huntington or Robin of Locksley. So the historians have kind of looked at that and said, oh, it could be that. But ultimately, it's a bit of a figure, a bit of a character in folklore that was used to rally up some kind of spirit of hope in a clearly very divided society where the haves and have-nots were hugely apart. But this is a book that kind of looks into the sort of the more truthful elements of it and what kind of truth you can get out of the myth. So I bought this in Nottingham, so if it's in Nottingham, surely that must mean it's a good source. But it was great going there, actually, and going to Sherwood Forest was really cool. And he's always been a special character for me, Robin Hood, because the earliest form of when you find Robin Hood mentioned is in the songs that the folk singers sang, the troubadours sang, and they were singing stories that were supposed to be giving your general public, your peasant, some reason to kind of think that, you know, essentially God was on their side because they had somebody doing good work. So yeah, Robin Hood, can't beat a bit of that. My favourite event, is this my favourite event in history? There's about three. I've got kind of three favourite events in history. They're all pretty old. But the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 is a fascinating thing that happened. It's the 14th century, but some of the demands they made were so forward-thinking. It would be quite radical even now to suggest some of the things they suggested. And these were peasants in the 14th century that were demanding new rights, basically because the amount of people in Europe have been thinned out so much because of the plague, because of the bubonic plague, because it wiped out a third of Europe. Basically, in Britain, there was enough of a difference to the amount of people that could be employed that the peasants were able to demand some rights, basically. So it wasn't about the landowners saying, well, do what I say or I'll get someone else to do it. They didn't have as many people to do that. So the peasants demanded some more rights, and they demanded they wanted more fairness, they wanted better living standards, they wanted some kind of recognition of what they did, and they got shafted by the king. But yeah, Peasants' Revolt of 1381, amazing book. This is a really good book. I've got loads of books on this, but this is the best one. Yeah, lots of first-hand accounts in there. The actual demands of the peasants are in there. This is a really, really good book. So if you're interested in that, there's that. If I've got time, I bought this. This was just, I tweaked my curiosity. So again, this is stretching the non-fiction element a little bit, but it does give you a window into the past. And this is from the 13th century, so very old still. And these are lyrics from Carmina Burana. So I found this, I couldn't resist it. I thought this looked really interesting. Yeah, because there are references to the Crusades in the lyrics, as well as there's some satire in there and some sort of moralising in it as well. So some interesting things that could be found in the selections from Carmina Burana. Going into July and August, we've got 1500 to 1820. So I've actually only got two books that I've got here, but I'm probably going to find some others, and you never know, I might just get a little bit of a obsession with the other big event for me, which is the English Civil War, the English Revolution, if you like. One of the people that's done this video, done the Historathon video, can't remember who it was, said they didn't know that England had a revolution, and it's such a huge part of our history. And you know, it's the only monarch that's had his head cut off by the people, Charles I, and then Cromwell screwed it up, and then Charles II was very popular monarch who took it over after Cromwell. And this is just such a fascinating period, because it was a period of whole melting pot of ideas, and there's loads and loads of radicals. So you may have heard of the Levellers. They were trying to make a difference to England at the time, and the Diggers, which were more extreme than the Levellers, and a different kind of, I mean, the Levellers were middle class, and the Diggers were kind of religious, working class, and all these elements were making these attempts to change England, and there was so many things going on. It was such an interesting period. So this is mostly the 1640s, but building up to the 1640s, the early 1600s are full of interesting a build up to chaos that happens through the 1640s. And Christopher Hill is a historian that specialised in the English Civil War. So there's loads and loads. He wrote so much stuff. And I haven't got it here with me. I picked this one, England's Turning Point, because this is the one I remember the least. But I do remember really liking it. So this is Essays on 17th Century English History. It's a brilliant book. But my favourite book by him And one of my all-time favourite history books is the book called World Turned Upside Down by Christopher Hill. And it does cover all those different radicals and radical thinking that was happening at the time around the Civil War. So, I'm going to read this again, definitely going to read this again in the summer months. Crime in England from 1550 to 1800. And when I did my degree, this was one of my favourite books I read, and I've forgotten a lot of it, but I know that it was, when I wrote an essay on organised crime in London in the 1500s and 1600s. And I had to do loads of research for it. I had to read tons and tons of books on it. This is one of the books I chose to read for it. And it's really interesting. So I'm going to go with that. So that's Crime in England, 1550 to 1800. From September to December, we've got the modern history period. So I'm going to pick... There's about 6 books here for this. So I found this book secondhand in Kim's bookshop. I bought it a while, about 6 months ago, I guess. And I haven't read it yet. American Radicalism, 1865 to 1901. So definitely right in this period we're talking about, but fascinating element to American history, sort of thing you don't hear about very often, because again, history is mostly taught top down, and you don't very often get a lot of things taught about the radicals. If anything, you might get something about the suffragettes, and that's about it. American radicalism, I don't know much about that, so that's really interesting. 1865 to 1901. This is a really important book, one of the most important history books I've ever read. It's really relevant now because of knowing the way it ties to so many different things nowadays, and the way it ties to racism, the way it ties to our history of prejudice, and it ties to the way all the different elements of the empire that still live on now. And this is The Scramble for Africa by Thomas Pakenham. Really important book. This was like a central reading for anyone doing the social history degree that I did, and I'd recommend it to anybody. This is all about how different European countries basically control different areas of Africa. The Scramble for Africa is about how it happened and how different parts of Europe tried to take different parts of Africa and how successful they were. It's a really good book. But again, I haven't read it for 20 years, so I want to read that again. This is The Good Old Days, Crime, Murder and Mayhem in Victorian London. So this is quite small. It's something, again, I found in a second-hand bookshop, and it just looked really interesting. So this is one of the most recent purchases I've had in history books. And I have got, if I can get to it, I'd really like to read 12 Years a Slave. So obviously a lot of people know this now because of the film, but the film was based on this account by Solomon Northup of his experience as a slave, and I definitely want to read his story. So I'm going to read that as well. There's Vive la Revolution by Eric Hobsbawm, which is about the different political turmoil that happened in Latin America in the 1950s and 60s, I think. 1950s and 60s, in Cuba and Brazil and Chile, Central America. So, essential reading, and Eric Hobsbawm is my favourite historian, so I know I'm going to like the way it's written, because ultimately history can be a bit dry, or it can be written really well. So, Eric Hobsbawm, good man. He's not around anymore. He died a few years ago. But he was really prolific. He wrote tons and tons of stuff. Again, usually from the bottom up, not the top down. He wrote a lot about individuals that were revolting. Yeah. So, those are some of the books I'm going to read in the main sections that I just cover those sections. But there are actually 3 books that are more general. So this one goes from the 18th century to the 20th century. So it covers 2 centuries. So it goes across the second half of the year as far as the prompts go. And this is about the history of the circus in Britain. So I really want to read this. It's again, another book I found in a second-hand bookshop. It's beautiful condition. Hopefully the circus will come to life in these pages, and I can tell you some stuff about how the circus was created. But yeah, if you're interested in that, Steve Ward, Beneath the Big Top. So I'm going to read that, which covers more than one section. Similarly, this one covers most of the year's prompts. African Europeans, an untold story. So again, this is an area of history that doesn't get covered enough, and it's the way that African immigrants have travelled across Europe and how they've influenced Europe, different European countries, and their impact has been largely not really talked about. And this is going to be really, really good, really interesting, and definitely an important book, I think. And then the other thing, this is another reread, but a fantastic book, and a book I read in my degree, Crime and Punishment in England, and it literally goes right back to the 1200s, I think, and it goes right up to the 19th century, I think, or maybe early 20th century. But it's a really, really good book, and it's definitely worth checking out. So Crime and Punishment in England is the other one I'll be reading that spans across all of them. So there's quite a lot to read, but it's across the whole year, so I can't wait to get stuck in. It's nice to go back to history. I was kind of reading history a lot at the same time I was reading philosophy a lot, so it might actually give me, because I might be, it's kind of a similar part of my head, so I might be tempted to get back into reading philosophy as well, but we'll see how that goes. But I'll also be doing my deep dive into Ray Bradbury and my folk tales and fables and folklore deep dive. I'm also going to be doing a few videos on him as well, but I'll tell you about that later. Anyway, this has been well long enough. Big shout out to the people that are hosting the event. If you have any books you want to read for this, if you're taking part, please comment below, because it'd be really interesting to know what you think. And I'd love to know what you think about the choices I've made, because clearly it's all very subjective, and I'm picking things that I'm going to be interested in. And I do think there is a difference between looking into history from the top down or looking into history from the bottom up. I do think that's a very different approach that I think is quite a significant one. So anyway, thanks a lot for watching. Bye.